New Zealand was once a dream destination, but for many it's turning into a financial nightmare. In just 3 years, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Auckland has skyrocketed from $367 to over $690 per week, an 88% increase. Buying a home? Nearly impossible, with prices in major cities now 7 to 10 times the median income. Grocery bills are climbing, electricity costs are surging, and wages aren't keeping up. In 2024 alone, a record 127,800 people left the country, more than in any year since the Great Depression. A housing crisis, a cost of living crisis, and now an immigration crisis. How did New Zealand reach this point? Let's break it down. In the early to mid-20th century, New Zealand was among the most prosperous nations in the world. Booming agricultural exports, especially dairy, meat and wool, ensured a robust economy with high employment levels. The welfare state introduced in the 1930s later expanded in the post-World War II era, provided a social safety net envied by many around the globe. By the 1970s, however, cracks began to show. Britain's entry into the European Economic Community reduced New Zealand's access to its most important export market, and international oil shocks wreaked havoc on the economy. The economic reforms of the 1980s, known as the Rogernomics, slashed subsidies and government spending, creating both winners and losers. Although these changes opened the door to more competition, they also led to high unemployment and a fraying social fabric. During the 1990s and early 2000s, the country rebranded itself as a clean and green destination. Tourism flourished, and international students filled the universities. Yet, the mid-2000s saw a housing market heating up, with successive governments unable to rein it in. A series of global financial shocks and more recent disruptions have now converged, leaving New Zealand with daunting challenges that many residents see no clear way forward at home. New Zealand is experiencing a significant exodus, with 127,800 individuals leaving in the year ending November 2024, a 28% increase compared to the previous year. This is provisionally the highest number of people leaving in an annual period ever. Of those departing, more than 50% were New Zealand citizens. While migration to Australia has long been part of New Zealand's narrative, the current scale and urgency of this outflow are unprecedented. Contributing factors include a soaring cost of living coupled with stagnant wage growth. Professionals such as doctors, nurses, engineers, and police officers are leaving in search of higher pay and more affordable housing elsewhere. The economy's struggles are evident, with GDP contracting 1% in the third quarter of 2024, following a 1.1% decline in the second quarter, indicating a technical recession. Unemployment figures may not always seem catastrophic, but they mask the growing underemployment crisis. Many people who need full-time work can only find part-time or casual jobs, forcing them to juggle multiple gigs and never feel secure. Government debate on these issues tends to drag on with scant tangible results. Meanwhile, skilled immigrants who might replenish the workforce face strict immigration policies that make it difficult to settle. When people think of the housing crisis, Auckland often springs to mind, but the issue extends nationwide. Once homeownership was a staple of Kiwi life, but now it seems unattainable for all but the wealthiest. Between October 2020 and October 2024, the median Auckland house price increased by $250,000, rising from $1 million to $1,250,000, a 25% increase over 4 years. Even dual-income families struggle to save for a down payment, especially when rent can consume nearly half of their take-home pay. Severe shortages force some people to live in cars, garages, or shared cramped spaces with multiple families. These rising costs have deepened the financial strain on existing homeowners while locking many aspiring buyers out of the market. The Resource Management Act, originally intended to protect the environment and manage resources, has become a labyrinth of red tape. Construction firms struggle to get timely consent, exacerbating the chronic shortage of new homes. Years of foreign investment, particularly from Asia, pushed up property prices. Although the government restricted most foreign buyers in 2018, the ban came too late. Property values remain far beyond the reach of many. Official policy responses often feel haphazard. The much-touted Kiwi Build program, which aimed to deliver 100,000 affordable homes within a decade, has fallen drastically short. with only 2,335 homes completed as of April 2024. This failure has left prospective buyers disillusioned. The combination of policy failures and escalating costs has created a perfect storm of unaffordability and stagnation, reinforcing the growing sentiment that living in New Zealand is becoming increasingly unfeasible. New Zealand is not just perceived as expensive. By most measures, it is truly one of the costliest places to live. Geographic isolation plays a major role. Nearly every imported item travels thousands of kilometers, adding transport costs that inflate consumer prices. This reality hits especially hard in the supermarket aisle. Over the past 3 years, food prices in New Zealand have steadily increased, despite occasional short-term declines. In May 2022, annual food price inflation was 6.8% higher than the previous year, driven by rising costs of fruit, vegetables, and dairy. By July 2024, the food price index had reached approximately 1,283 points, continuing an upward trend despite a brief 0.3% decrease in June 2024, marking the first annual decline in nearly 6 years. However, by December 2024, food prices surged again, increasing by 1.5% year-on-year, the highest rise since February 2024. A basic weekly shop for a family of 4 in nearly 2025 can now cost around $300, with items like a single head of broccoli reaching up to $7. The supermarket industry also operates as a near duopoly, meaning limited competition and little incentive to keep prices reasonable. Beyond groceries, transportation and utilities add to the burden. Fuel prices frequently surpass those of neighbouring Australia, and public transport infrastructure, particularly in provincial areas, remains underdeveloped, forcing many to rely on cars. Electricity costs continue to climb as well, and wages have failed to keep pace. Dining out feels like a luxury, with some Queenstown eateries charging $20 for a single burrito. That's less a casual meal or more a financial decision. Tax structures compound the pain. While the absence of a broad capital gains tax benefits property investors, it leaves wage earners bearing a disproportionate share of GST and income tax. The so-called Bright Line test, aimed at curbing property speculation, has done little to bring down housing costs. New Zealand's middle class, once robust, finds itself increasingly squeezed between stagnant income and relentless price hike. Economics alone fail to capture the depth of New Zealand's current struggles. The nation appears gripped by a cultural malaise, a no culture characterized by bureaucratic inertia and public skepticism towards innovation or bold initiatives. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon has expressed concern that the nation has fallen into a default mindset of resistance, often dismissing new ideas with a prevailing attitude of "that won't work." He warns that this approach creates significant barriers for entrepreneurs and civic leaders seeking to launch new initiatives or modernize outdated infrastructure. Crime is also on the rise, undermining New Zealand's long-held reputation as one of the safest countries in the world. Ram raids, gang violence, and youth offences have grown more common, unsettling communities from Hamilton to parts of Auckland. Economically struggling neighbourhoods, already burdened by limited job prospects, are often the hardest hit. Social inequalities are widening too, with housing and employment gaps disproportionately affecting Maori and Pacifica. Meanwhile, mental health services are strained under the weight of escalating issues, from teenage anxiety to adult depression and stress-related illnesses. All these factors erode the sense of unity that once tied New Zealanders together. Beyond housing costs and expensive groceries, basic public services in healthcare and education are faltering under pressure. New Zealand once enjoyed a strong reputation for accessible healthcare, but today it suffers from critical staffing shortages that extend to hospitals nationwide. Nurses and specialists regularly emigrate for better pay and conditions, leaving behind a skeleton workforce to manage lengthy patient waitlists. Burnout is rampant, pushing even more healthcare professionals to seek opportunities elsewhere. On the education front, schools that once boasted smaller class sizes and a student-centric ethos now grapple with limited funding, overworked teachers, and aging facilities. Hiring gaps remain unfulfilled, particularly in rural areas, entering a job market where wages hardly cover basic living expenses. This reality fuels the country's growing brain drain. Academics, researchers, and medical professionals look abroad for better-funded institutions and higher salaries. Over time, this depletion of skilled talent risks undermining New Zealand's research, development, and innovation capabilities. New Zealand didn't become unlivable overnight. A series of policy missteps, economic shocks, and global factors have pushed the country into this crisis. For years, government spending soared, with borrowed money flooding the economy. Pandemic-era stimulus pumped billions into circulation, driving inflation and eroding purchasing power. The Reserve Bank responded with aggressive interest rate hikes. But by then, the damage was done. Housing costs spiraled due to restrictive zoning laws, slow construction approvals, and years of speculative investment. The government's foreign buyer ban came too late, and Kiwi Build, once promised as the solution, failed spectacularly. At the same time, businesses struggled with rising operational costs, leading to layoffs. New Zealand is facing serious challenges, but history shows that resilience and innovation have always been part of its identity. Kiwis have tackled economic downturns, housing shortages, and policy failures before, and they can do it again. The key question is, what steps need to be taken now to restore affordability and opportunity? Is it time for bold new policies, a shift in economic priorities, or a rethinking of how the country operates? Let's start the conversation in the comments below. If you found this look into New Zealand's challenges eye-opening, you'll want to check out what's happening in Venezuela. One of the richest countries in Latin America, Venezuela has seen a shocking economic collapse, leading to hyperinflation, mass migration, and food shortages. What went so horribly wrong? Click here to watch the full story now.